this evening is Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. And Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke, professional emeritus at Montana State University, has dedicated her life and career to working with indigenous populations. She has been adopted by enrolled tribal members and given traditional names by the three Northern Plains spiritual leaders, including the Blackfeet. That means women with great knowledge. The Northern Cheyenne walks all women, and in the Lakota Sioux, women who helps people. She holds degrees in English, history, psychology, and educational leadership. She is also a licensed therapist and has been a high school English teacher, a counselor, a school administrator, a university professor and administrator, the author of several children's books and the best-selling Sisters in the Blood and Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. And her second book in the field of the ufology is Sky People, Untold Stories of Alien Encounters in Mesoamerica, and amazing information here. While retired from academia, she continues to travel and interview individuals throughout the indigenous world about their encounters with UFOs and aliens. And tonight we're going to be discussing her new book, which I'm very, very excited about, called More Encounters with Star People, Urban American Indians Tell Their Stories. And this is going to be really awesome. So her website is www.sixkiller.com. And please welcome Ardy to the show this evening. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great, and you sound wonderful. How are you?
Well, I've had some health problems here the last few months, but I'm on the mend and doing great. I was outside today decorating for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
We had such unbelievable weather here. It's just like it was, August here.
Mm-hmm.
It's been so warm in the high 60s and even low 70s, and it's due to change. And I remember last year struggling through the snow with all my decorations, and I decided this year, I don't care if it is November, I'm going to get ahead of the game this year.
Oh, I don't blame you at all. Yeah, we've had mild weather here too. It's spoiling us. I'm sure we're going to get a big snowstorm at some point. But yeah, that's nice. I'm glad you can enjoy the great weather.
Snow on the way, next week. So
right.
I'm prepared for it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, and also I want to get into your book here because you have More Encounters with Star People, Urban American Indians Tell Their Stories. This is so fascinating, and I'd kind of like to know, did you kind of go into the details of where you've been with other sources for this information, or is this entirely based on a new source?
Well, no, all of these stories are completely new. One of the things that is not probably common knowledge about Native American people is that 78% of us do not live on reservations. We live in small town America, rural areas, and in cities. Mm-hmm. And as I, travel about the country and visit with people, I would often, a lot of the people, I live in, rural America and close to a small city, and my work has, I've dealt with, Indians both on and off the reservation. So, a lot of my stories come from people who do not live on the reservation, although they may have strong contacts with the reservation. Mm-hmm. Part of it's due to the fact that back in the late 50s and 60s, there was a movement to eliminate reservations by the government, and they started relocating people to cities and would put them to work in manufacturing places. The car industry was a popular place to put Indians, so you had whole Indian communities growing up in cities like New York City and Cleveland, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Chicago, which still exists today. You'll find American Indian centers in cities throughout the United States that serve as a gathering place, a social place, a place for people to come if they're having problems. And so many times those people who do not live on reservations are overlooked. And of course, many of my friends come from this group. Mm-hmm. And so it was, I think, fitting that I look at the stories that they were telling as opposed to the stories from residents of the reservation. And I was really interested in whether or not there was a major difference in their stories. And what I've found is, among urban Indians, there seems to be a more variety of encounters with different types of star beings. There seem to be more questioning of their motives. Why are they here? What are they doing? And that kind of personal interest grew into questioning those that they encountered, the beings that they encountered, and many times got some very different answers. And so it was, as I was going through all my research and my tapes and my notes, it was interesting to, I tried to, I looked at the different themes in ufology research and literature. And so I tried to present stories to my readers that, I have stories of where people were abducted, stories of a hybrid baby, stories of different kinds of entities that were encountered. So I tried to present a whole variety of stories that I had collected that followed along the trends and themes of current literature.
Right. When they talk about the different types of star beings, can you give us some examples insofar as the comparison between what they've been experiencing and say, the reservations?
Well, I think, a lot of my stories in my first book, Encounters with Star People, came from elders who accepted the visits as normal. They had learned as children, and this history had been passed down to them, and in many cases they were, it was not a surprise if they encountered a star being. Whereas with some of the people in my new book, even though they had heard the stories, they were far removed. They were more removed from the reservation. I shouldn't say far removed, but more removed, and in most cases were more educated. And that's not out of any disrespect to the people that in my first book, but it's simply many of the urban Indians, are college graduates, and that's part of the reason why they don't live on reservations is, they got college degrees and often married non-Indians and chose to live off the reservation for that reason. Or, once they graduated, found themselves unemployable on the reservation and chose to live where they could find work. And so their perspectives were somewhat different in that they weren't just willing to accept that it was a part of their history and a part of the legends of their people, but they were more questioning of, well, why do you keep coming back here? What's your motive? Why are you taking my DNA? Why are you performing these experiments on me? You have no right to do this. And so, that was a different aspect that I found quite interesting.
It certainly sounds like it. So it wasn't necessarily a positive experience.
Not with all of them, no. And there is more of a foreboding of, perhaps they're here for reasons. If you look at the one chapter in the book, I think it was called Aliens and an Abandoned Copper Mine. You have an individual who was a most reliable individual, a Vietnam War veteran who had lived in this area for all of his life. His mother was a Navajo. His father was a high school math teacher, a non-Indian who had moved on the reservation to teach, met his mother, and and he was their only child, and his father had been killed in an auto accident, and he had been raised by his mother on the reservation, was drafted and sent to Vietnam, and came back and used a small life insurance policy that his father had. His mother gave it to him, and he opened up a little garage servicing a lot of tourists that traveled through the region. And, he told me he was going to a Veterans Day celebration, but on his way, he decided that the night before he was going to go up into the mountains and camp. His wife had passed away, and they often went into the mountains, and he went there to get away from people and to reminisce about their good times there and to remember his wife. And so he and his dog went up, out of the town, out into a fairly isolated region. And as the night progressed, he spotted this huge UFO that came over. He said it blocked out all the stars except on the fringes. It was this huge ship. And then seconds later, these vehicles started zooming out of this large ship, like little balls of light, just going in all directions. If his dog was very frightened by all this, he never saw anything else. But the next morning, he packed up to leave to go to the veterans ceremony, and came across as he was traveling down out of these arid hills. He spied a spacecraft that was parked in the valley below, and he watched as they went into this abandoned copper mine and were taking ore samples and bringing them out, choosing the ones they wanted and discarding the ones they didn't want. Well, he really questioned their motives. Why are they doing this? What's going on? Why are they taking samples from an old abandoned copper mine? And then, moves on to, continues on and on the other side of the hill discovers another spacecraft, and it was drilling in the soil and taking samples of the soil. So he does not think they're here for friendly reasons. He thinks that they have another motive, and whether it's resources that they're after or certain kinds of ore that they're after that they need, but he doesn't trust them at all. And he doesn't trust the government either, because he thinks that the government is fully aware that all these things are going on, and the American people are just being lied to. And so, this was these experiences that happened in many cases in this new book are very different than the experiences that happened on the reservation. So
they certainly seem like it. Yeah,
I'm really excited about it because I think it gives people such a wide range of experiences to read about.
Oh, absolutely. And this is available on Amazon.com. That's probably the best way, or just a regular bookstore. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I encourage everybody to purchase a copy. Yeah, I agree with you on that one, because there are a lot of contactees, regardless of your research too, that are out there that have been in cities and areas where they've had probably similar experiences, and they're probably asking the same questions. What is the...
Well, and the interesting thing about it is, people not only want to know how I have access to these people, and obviously being, part Native myself, opens doors for me, and I've been, the work that I did both as a teacher and as a researcher and professor at Montana State University allowed me access to the reservations and to the people, and after they got to know me and trusted me, they shared with me their most private secrets when they found out my interest. And in many cases, I'd be sought out because people had never told their stories, and they were most interested in finding out if there were other people who had had similar experiences. that provided me, the opportunity to talk to individuals who had not told anybody. But when my first book came out, it was a very interesting experience I had. I was at a barbecue, and there were, I think, about 10 of us that were there, and there was a lady there who she was not from our group. Everybody else there had, were neighbors or knew each other quite well. But this lady was a friend of one of our. She was visiting one of our friends, and so she was there, and the subject was brought up. Well, Ardy just had a book published, and she looked at me, and she was a former teacher. She was a retired teacher, and she said, "Well, what's your book about?" And you always, when you say UFOs, you expect the giggle effect that people are going to look at you sideways and say, "Oh yeah, one of those," And instead, she responded, "Well, I've had an encounter." And all of a sudden, there were two doctors there, medical doctors, and they both said, "We've had encounters too." There was a geologist there who traveled the world. A lot of his experience had been in South America. And he said, "Well, I have too." Several, he said, in fact, in South America. And there was a graduate student there. Well, by the time they got around, all of them speaking about their experiences, 6 out of the 10 people there had had encounters.
Wow.
One form or another. And it led me to believe how many of us in our social groups never ask our friends, never talk to people that we're acquainted to and ask them if they've ever had an encounter. Because, and I believe that there is a silent majority out there who never talk about these things.
I agree.
Because it could affect their friendships, it could affect their family relationships, it could affect their job. One of the things that was interesting about this new group I interviewed is they would say to me, "You're not going to put anything on Facebook, are you? I don't want to come home one day and find that I'm plastered all over some National Enquirer or Star Magazine that about this." And I said, "Oh no, you never have to worry about that." But people have concern about this in this day of technology, that they'll be kind of outed as a believer or an experiencer or an abductee involving UFOs and star beings.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's a real concern. People say, "Oh, well, that's the way it used to be." Well, it still exists today. And I'm certainly a witness to that, because one of the things over and over and over again, I would don't use my real name. Don't tell anybody where I'm from. And on the reservation, the people were very concerned that a bunch of researchers would come onto the reservation and disrupt the whole life on the reservation, whereas the people in the cities just didn't want anybody catching them on the street or coming to their house and beating on their door, journalists trying to get, some kind of information about their story.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the internet could be a vicious thing, especially when people are starting to Google each other and get all sorts of dirt or any kind of information they can on each other.
Well, and also employers are looking online today. You go apply for a job, and the first thing they do is check you out on. And I recently had an experience with that, because I contacted a realtor. There was a home for sale up in the mountains with 15 acres, and I thought, well, maybe I should take a look at this. I live out in the valley, and 2 acres, and when I moved here, there was nobody within, shouting. Well, my closest neighbor was at least a half a mile to a mile away, and I could go out and stand in my backyard and turn 360 degrees and couldn't see a light. Today, all of these housing developments, the farmers are selling their land, and these houses are being built 10 feet apart, and they go up overnight. And suddenly, you haven't been to town for a couple of days, and you drive by these places where beautiful ranches used to exist, and now it's a maze of houses. of people living in these congested areas, and the school district is expecting, overnight they're expecting 200 new students, and, they're just overwhelmed with all the people that are moving here. And you suddenly realize that, life is changing, and there are so many more people moving in on you. So I wanted to think, well, maybe I just need to move out of here. And I saw this house advertised. And so I contacted this realtor, had listed it, and made arrangements to go see it. I thought, well, 15 acres, I only own two now. 15 acres will give me a more breathing room. And the next thing I know, I'm getting emails from the broker of the real estate office talking to me about my name and about my books and wanting to know if I know so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. I get another email from somebody in that office who has been, Googling. And, it's just amazing how much knowledge and how much information people gather about you. And I'm not a Facebook person. I don't go on Twitter. I don't do any of that stuff. I just stay away from that. I'm I guess the old school because there's just too much damage done with those kind of things. And I don't Google myself, and I don't listen to my interviews, and I don't go on to YouTube because once I've said it, I tell the truth, and that's it. I don't need to listen. I'm not so vain that I have to listen to myself over and over and over.
Right.
And so, it's an amazing world out there, and it's not a world that I grew up in.
No.
And that I'm comfortable with,
I agree. Well, it's also that people are not using their psychic radar as much as they used to, because I think the internet has kind of created an interference program to some degree.
I agree.
So I like the idea of being away from everything and having a balance, but I think we're way off balance, as you probably know and are aware of. This entire planet's off balance, and there's some strangeness here. So I think the work that you're doing is incredible. And I will say that this is a big deal. Any type of information based on UFOs and stories of people who have had real encounters, that's something that's important, because we need some kind of a benchmark for where they've been and what their experiences are. We're never going to get anything out of the mainstream. We're never going to get anything out of people who edit everything on regular television. So what you're doing is incredible work. I love it.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's been a long journey for me, because when I was a child, I heard star stories, and as you grow up and you go to school and you graduate from high school, you go to college, and then you get your first job, and you become removed from those ancient stories, even though they're a part of who you are. It's just not something that you hear every day, or that is a present part of you, because you're in mainstream America trying to make a career for yourself and survive, And when I moved out, when I accepted a job at Montana State University, one of the things that one of the first persons I encountered was a man who shared with me star stories of his people. And it was, unusual circumstances, because I had gone on his reservation to recruit students to come to Montana State University to study teaching, or to become leaders in education on the reservation. And after the students left, and he and I had a little dinner, off the reservation. And then on our way back through the reservation, he asked me, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to show you something. And I said, sure. And so he took me up in the hills and mountains above his little village, and he said, well, if we're lucky, they'll come. And he was talking about the star people. And he got out his binoculars, and we sat on this boulder as night came, and as we sat there, he started telling me the legends of his people. And all of a sudden, this wave just came over me, and I thought, my goodness, this is the story's so similar to my people. And so I began, it was just like a revelation,
Mm-hmm.
Are there other tribes out there that have similar stories? And that thought had never occurred to me. Here I had been so engulfed in, getting my degrees and teaching and in the field of administration, and I just had was a part of me that, I kind of set aside. And as I was driving back home, I kept thinking about this. Well, wonder if there are other tribes out there. And, of course, I was charged with visiting all these reservations as kind of an ambassador from MSU to offer scholarships and invite students to come. And I had a center. It was I was the first director of the Center for Bilingual Multicultural Education, which was devoted to students who spoke native languages and to get them to come to school to become teachers, because when I came to Montana, there were probably a half a dozen teachers of native descent that were teaching on reservations, and students really had no role models in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so the intent of Montana State as a land-grant institution was, we have a responsibility to reach out to the native communities and see if we can't correct a situation where Native students feel welcome in a university setting and can become teachers and principals and superintendents. So I was traveling, almost weekly out to reservations, and then, we expanded from Montana into the Dakotas and Wyoming and Idaho and even down into Arizona and Alaska. We were recruiting students.
Mm.
And that happened over years. But as I would travel, people would say, "Oh, you want to go to dinner tonight, or you want to stay over this weekend, and we'll take a trip out. We'll camp out, or there's a football game on Friday night. You got to see our kids play," and just all sorts of things like that would happen that I didn't have any ties, and so I welcomed the opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
to be among what I considered my people. It was like being home. And as I gained friendships, one of the things I would do is I would say, can you direct me to any elders that might have ancient legends? And of course, when I would meet with elders, I always said, do you have any ancient star stories? And that was my first step into this field, because at first I was just interested in the ancient legends. And so I was collecting those from elders, many of them who are past now. And one day this lady said to me, "Well, you keep asking us about the old stories. Why don't you ask us about the new stories?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she says, "Well, the Star people still come here. There's all kinds of UFO encounters that happen here on the reservation." And so I thought, well, she's right. I've never thought about going in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started asking people, about contemporary experiences. It was just amazing, the stories I've told. I haven't begun to tell the unusual and extraordinary stories I've been told. And perhaps that will be my next book,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to decide, what direction I'm going to go in. I generally try to space out my books, which the publishers want, like a year and a half apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of material. That's for darn sure.
Oh, I do. I have hundreds and hundreds of stories.
Wonderful.
And it's difficult because my first book was kind of an experiment because, I had this elder challenge me. She said, you have a responsibility to tell these stories. And so when I started out, it was like, okay, well, I think the readers would enjoy this story and this story and this story. And then I became more selective, because how many books can you publish in this field? And so I wanted to present to my readers in Sky People that this just isn't just happening in America, and this isn't just to American Indians. It's happening throughout Central America and South. It's happening all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I chose Central America because I had traveled there so extensively, and especially among the Maya people, and had lived in their villages and in their homes, and had, spent extensive time there, and along the way collecting stories. And so that was a natural for me. And then I thought, well, people might be interested in what the differences among urban Indians and reservation Indians. And now I'm kind of at a threshold. I have so much information to share with people,
mm-hmm.
But I try to focus in on a certain area. So what I may do in this next one, first I thought I might go with telling an Indian legend that is like a history of a tribal group, the story that they have told and passed down for generations, that indicate that we're probably talking about alien abduction here. We're probably
mm-hmm.
talking about, an elder up in Alaska told me a story about the men with tails. That was an ancient story of his people, of this reptilian community that lived not too far from where his people's village was. And these men with tails, were reptilian and had this tail that they could swivel on and use in combat. And stories of men that were taken to the stars by these beautiful women and were married them and even forced to stay there, and fathered children with them, and then finally are so unhappy their wives allow them to come back to Earth, but with a warning. If you marry an Earth woman, this is what's going to happen, or I'm coming for you. And
wow.
And how the villagers said one night, the brightest light they'd ever seen appeared, and he disappeared, and they knew he had gone back to the stars to live with his star wife. Well, those are not stories that are meant to entertain. Those are legends of what occurred at a certain time to a certain person at a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, that might be an interesting approach, but it's so complex presenting an ancient legend and then trying to find a contemporary legend that perhaps extends that, or validates that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many stories, and so I want to write several stories with a legend, and it isn't working out with my publisher. So I'm thinking maybe what I should do is just focus on extraordinary and unusual events that have happened to people, and then perhaps just do a small book about the ancient star legends, and
mm-hmm.
let it stand alone. And if people are interested in learning about it, then they can do that.
I think you should do that, because I know there are probably a lot of people out there who might have an ancestral bloodline that actually has something similar. And that's the thing, if they read something that correlates to where they've been or their ancestors have been, that's a really big deal. So yeah, I hope you do that. And all of your books are fantastic. And I was looking at you have a chapter here called A Watcher in Death Valley. And I was.
Oh yeah.
Would you like to?
In fact, I'm going to see my friend that I met in Death Valley. He was one of the most memorable persons you can ever meet, Jim Grey Dog, and he watches for aliens, and he has seen many people. He and his friends were abducted when they were just recent high school graduates, and their lives were changed forever. And he believes that the most of them, the intents are negative and not good, and he talks about those who return and those who didn't return. And the most amazing thing about Jim was he kept a diary. He had it in his pocket, and he pulled it out, and he had listed the date of the abduction, the time of the abduction, the description of the individual who was taken, right down to what they were wearing, what he thought they weighed, and how tall they were, and all of this stuff that he had recorded in this book. And then he would record whether they returned or not. And you know, one of his high school friends that had been abducted was doing the same thing. Jim was located in Death Valley, but a friend down in Arizona that was doing the same thing. One of the women of the group was in a nursing home suffering from Alzheimer's, and he went to visit her. And the nurse there said, you know, she's just beyond help. All she talks about is an alien baby and aliens and UFOs, you know, and the nurse just felt that she was crazy, you know. But Jim knew otherwise. He knew what was going on because she believed that she had had an alien baby and it was taken away from her, and she was never ever able to have a child after that. So she had these marriages where husbands who discovered that she couldn't have children just left her, you know, and he talked about the effect these things had on their lives, and so it was. I mean, he's just an amazing man, and I'm going to be down in his area in a couple of months, and we're going to connect up again, and in fact, he's going to travel with me down to Phoenix to meet his other friend. He tries to spend the winters down south with his friend because it's warmer down there than it is, you know, out in the area of Nevada where he lives. So.
Oh yeah, that'll be exciting. You know, it's interesting
yeah.
you're talking about that because a lot of women supposedly reported things like that similar, where they had a child that was a hybrid of some kind that was taken from them, and that's a pattern. That's not just a singular incident, from what I understand.
Well, and that's true, and you know, what is amazing, I've probably interviewed about a dozen men who, over the course of the years I've been investigating this and recording these stories, probably maybe a little bit more than a dozen, but who themselves have fathered alien children. And one of the most interesting accounts is of a man who contacted me. He heard me on Coast to Coast radio show, and he contacted me and said, you know, I have no place else to go. I have nobody else to talk to, and, you know, could we set up a meeting? And I set up a meeting with him, and I was going to be in the area where he lived, and so we set up a meeting where we were going to meet, and he told me a story of having a child, an alien child that he had been introduced to. He had a history of abductions, and he had been introduced to this child who looked like an Earth child, but had characteristics too of its alien mother, and had been asked to take that child and raise that child on Earth. And he said they told him that they looked for people who were in, you know, like medical doctors, lawyers, teachers, different people in highly skilled technical fields. He was a mathematician. He had a PhD in math, and what they would abduct those kinds of people because they wanted people of fairly high intelligence to breed with their females, and they told him that the child already contained all the knowledge of his mother, and now it was time for him to learn the knowledge of his father. And I said, this is one of the strangest stories I've ever been told. And he said, well, I understand that there are literally hundreds of these children living on Earth today and being raised by their fathers.
That's fascinating.
That you know, and I said, well, is there a purpose for him to stay here? What is, you know, he says, I don't know. I really don't know.
Do they exhibit some kind of a special ability?
Well, he said that they had the ability to communicate telepathically, to read minds. They could appear and disappear at will. They had ability to manipulate objects, just a number of things. And of course, he was so concerned about how this was going to fit into his lifestyle. Because of his abductions, he admitted that he had never had any kind of a long-term relationship with a woman. And because he said, how do I explain that I suddenly disappear, when I'm being taken on board these spaceships, and how am I going to tell a woman that, I'm being used to father alien children? No woman's going to believe that. So he just kind of, one of the things he had done is just move around the country. He would stay in a job for a year or two, and then the next thing you know, he's off someplace else. But he was very close to his mother. He had been raised by a single mom. His father was an Italian foreign student in the U.S., and when his mother got pregnant, he conveniently disappeared back to Italy and left her alone, and she raised him by herself. And so he was very close to her, and one of his biggest concerns is what was his mother going to think of him. And I said, well, just tell her that the mother has decided that she doesn't want to raise the child, which is true, and that you're going to take over those responsibilities, and you need her help. And I hear from him now on a regular basis. He is with his mother and the boy, his son, living in a foreign country. He was very concerned how the child was going to fit in, not knowing anything about the Earth culture. And so he's doing well. He's teaching and researching at a foreign university, and I plan to meet up with him in Hawaii.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've seen photos of the child. He told me that the Star Child is now an Earth Child. He loves pizza, Star Wars, and what's the other thing? Maybe football. I can't remember what the other thing was offhand.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said that there are literally hundreds of men out there in the world who are raising these children. Now, tell me, if these children can, I'd be interested in finding out if the child can communicate with the other children on Earth, telepathically.
I would think they could.
Because I've been told stories of how these children are almost like a bee colony. They can anticipate each other's feelings and knowledge, and are able to act simultaneously as a group of, there may be 6 children, but they have one mind because they all understand one another.
Right, like a hive, hive collective. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I'm interested in whether they have contact with these other children. But I'm going to broach that subject lightly because, after all, this is a child, but I'm going to talk to Wallace about it.
Oh, I definitely would. When are you going to Hawaii?
But I do want to tell his story in the next book because it is a fascinating story.
It certainly sounds like it. When are you going to Hawaii?
This Christmas.
Oh, you are? Well, have fun. What island are you going to?
Huh?
What island are you going to go to?
Well, the Big Island will be my base, and then of course I can't pass up Waikiki. So I have friends on the Big Island, and I always rent a house down there on the Big Island during the Christmas, and then because you get so tired, if you're going to be there a week or two, you want to make sure you have some place where you can make your breakfast and have a sandwich if you want to, and a home-like environment, and I do that, and then I move over to Waikiki, and because I for some reason I don't feel like I'm in Hawaii unless I'm down, and I always stay over in Hilo, which is the rainforest basically, and so then I go to Waikiki and do the tourist thing for a couple of days and decide I've had enough and come back. But I have the Hawaiian people have a lot of the star, a connection with the stars as well. And of course they have the little people, the many Huni, and I have some great Hawaiian friends who, have told me stories too. So that's another thing. One of the things that interests me so much is how so many of the indigenous populations had these powerful women who came from the sky or had connections with the cosmos, that ruled over people or taught them things. And so that's another thing that is just so amazing to me,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've read Sky People, but there's a story in there about the stone woman that appears in this place, and they always say that she can walk through walls, and then when she disappears, a beam comes down, and this what we would call UFO today, comes down and takes her away,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Right.
never know when she's going to appear or disappear, and this is a small village, people telling me about these experiences.
Mm-hmm. Right. And a lot of these experiences are ongoing abductions. I mean, they're not just like once in a blue moon and it
No,
never happens. This is ongoing, correct?
right.
Yeah.
Well,
And it's
I interviewed in my present book, More Encounters with Star People, a 90-year-old woman on she had grown up, lived most of her life on the reservation, but she had come to a situation. She was mentally very alert. Physically, she could, fix her own breakfast and, pretty much take care of a small task, but she couldn't fully take care of herself. So she moved off the reservation, was living with her daughter, and she told me about being abducted since she was a child, and she was 90 years old. And she told me that she got so angry when she was first abducted. She had decided, well, not when she was first abducted, but when she had decided that it was the Nazis that were taking her. Because it was in the midst of World War II, and she kept thinking, who are these people that are taking me? I've been captured by the Nazis. And then, she later began to realize that these were not people of Earth. And she said she finally demanded to know why they were taking her. And they told her that her DNA was closest to theirs.
That's interesting.
And so she didn't know what DNA is. Well, this is 1974. Who knew what DNA was back then?
Mm-hmm.
None of us knew, because this was the terminology of researchers, not of contemporary Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And to prove her point, she walked over to the kitchen drawer and she pulled out this spiral-bound notebook. And in it, she had kept a record since she had been a young girl of events that had happened in her life during each year. And it might be my sister ran away, and from the boarding school, or Grandma Josie died. Those kinds of things. And under the year 1974, she had written in this notebook, in small letters, DNA. And she had spelled out the word molecule, because they tried to explain to her what it was. But she didn't know what a word molecule was. But so she phonetically spelled out M-A-U-L, like mall, A, and then Q, she spelled it C-U-L-E, she put.
Mm-hmm.
And she just left it. That's all she put in the book. That was the only thing about that abduction that occurred, that she had written those words down about that abduction.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I asked everybody what DNA was, and nobody knew what it was. And I said, well, in 1974, there would be very few people who would know what it was, because it didn't become a part of our vernacular until, probably. She said, well, she said she watched the Maury show, and that she heard about DNA on the Maury show. The first time she heard about it, that kind of like Jerry Springer,
Oh,
shows
right. Yeah. Yeah.
that was on TV, and he would talk about DNA. So she came to understand that it meant you could tell by taking somebody's blood whether they fathered a child or not. She started to, making that connection. And so she was a fascinating lady, but I think, how long after that did DNA become a common terminology in the English language where you and I know what DNA, I'm not sure I fully understand scientifically what it is, but I have a general concept of what DNA is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But,
Yeah.
Here's this 90-year-old lady telling me this and pulling out this old, tattered, spiral-bound notebook where she had kept the events of her life,
Wow.
recorded, just notes, of something that happened, that she thought was significant enough that she should write it in that year, that's what happened.
I'm glad she
that
did.
book alone would be a treasure chest, of knowledge.
Oh, absolutely, it will. And Artie, we're just about out of time here in the Illusion of on the first hour. I just wanted to thank you. I know you can only stay an hour, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining us. And I want everybody to make sure you purchase Artie's book, More Encounters with Star People, Urban American Indians Tell Their Stories. And, of course, Amazon.com is the best way to purchase it, right, Artie?
Yes, and, I want everybody, your listeners, to know that if you have stories to tell, if you have questions to ask, if you've read my book and you want to discuss further, if you've had an experience and want somebody to talk to tell about, write me, Ardy, ARDY, at sixkiller.com. I answer every single email myself. I do not have a staff that answers them. I answer your emails and I read them. So feel welcome to write me or to visit my webpage at www.sixkiller.com.
Excellent. Yeah, you have a beautiful website, too, by the way. It's very, very nice. Nice format. Yeah, I like it a lot. And have a wonderful Christmas if I don't get in touch with you. I do want to have you back on the show at some point to continue.
I would love to do that.
Okay, yeah.
After the new year, maybe we can get back together and discuss some more things.
All right, we'll do that. Well, Ardy, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful evening. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.